and I'm recording this meeting so we can send it out. I hope that's been helpful for you to send to other folks to see it. This has been a big joy for me, and I know it's been a big joy for Michael. And I hope this inspires some of you to actually take the course in October. Uh, that's what we're looking at. So we're still planning that. So if you're interested, just email us. And we only have 15 slots, but I think those 15 slots go really quick. So if you're interested, email us and we'll save you a spot. But without further ado, Michael,
Sorry,
your
can I
show.
just ask quickly, when in October? When in October?
We're still working that out with Michael, so we don't have a date yet. And it depends on if we're fully opened at that time because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we're planning that far out, but yet we're still taking baby steps.
Yeah, I understand.
All right.
Okay, everybody, great to see you. I've come to look forward to Thursdays at 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. And if we kept this up, I could really imagine what a treat it would be just to have a group of people that you come together with, and if nothing else, just feel that you're a part of a body of people. And I'm stressing that because in a way, what we've been talking about at the individual level holds true at the community level. In other words, person-centered care, if it's incorporated into a culture, really becomes community-centered in centering care. So in a sense, this in a virtual space is acting out or embodying what could very well be possible in an actual space. I don't know about you, but even when we're not communicating in just these 3 previous weeks, even when we're not communicating, I occasionally think about seeing you the Thursday that's coming up. And that in that moment, the community's living in my imagination. So even when we're not an actual company of one another, even virtually, we've nevertheless, and perhaps if you do this, then we've nevertheless internalized each other's presence. Visit their companions or buddies, as we call them, once a week, 30, 40 minutes. Even a visit from someone once a week compared to not having a visit of that regularity. And I'm talking about someone that you indeed look forward to seeing. Even once a week is a profound impact on a person's life. And I think it has something to do with this internalizing each other. So if I'm, let's say, on a Monday, and I don't have a friend who I'm looking forward to visit next week, well, that's one Monday. But if it's Monday and I have a friend coming, let's say Saturday, well, that's a very different Monday. So even when we're not physically in each other's presence, it can make a profound impact on a person feeling whether or not he or she belongs and matters. So all that to say, I'm happy to see you. As always, I want to share with you that this is a outreach part of Memory Bridge's larger work invested in ending the emotional isolation of people with dementia, and it's being made possible by Sunnyview and by the gift of Richard and Jean Eckert, who I think about folks who did not know me well and who did not know Memory Bridge except as it was described to them of the value of it. For someone to decide to and fund this kind of outreach at that level is, I think, a remarkable thing. And I feel deeply, deeply grateful, especially to Jean, whom I was able to meet in person numerous times. Our series is, this was our question: what does person-centered care actually mean? This is the 4th presentation entitled The Soul of Care. And my goal in this particular presentation is to really distill the answer, or an answer, perhaps not the answer, an answer to the question, what does person-centered care actually mean? I'd like to answer that in a way that is so distilled and visualable, so that it can be imagined in such concrete terms that from here on out, when you hear the term person-centered care, you will have a profound understanding of it right down into your bones. And that is my self-challenge today. So here we go. Person-centered care was initially offered as a new model in contrast with the biomedical approach. And so I have here on the screen the biomedical approach to the left, person-centered care to the right. Each of those boxes represent frames of reference or paradigms. So real quickly, let me interpret the initials. The NI stands for neurological impact. So if we're looking at the biomedical approach rectangle, the essential premise of research and of practice, the essential premise is that neurological impact is equal to the symptoms of dementia and vice versa, so that the symptoms of dementia that is evinced in any one person is equal to the neurological impact on that person's brain. A short way of saying this is what you see in way of behavior corresponds to something that's happening in the brain. That is the essential premise of the biomedical approach. And for all of its limitations, it is nevertheless the case that that premise is helpful in advancing certain kinds of initiatives, including medicine and technological intervention. So although I'm going to contrast that approach with understanding that I feel is far, far superior in many, many ways, I don't want to do so in the spirit of impugning the valuable gains that take place within the limitations of the canons of science. So let me just say, this is not an either or. In fact, I would say that the person-centered care can incorporate the biomedical approach very easily and can essentially put it in a larger context. So no either or here, no goofus and gallant. To the right, the paradigm, person-centered care. Here we go. Neurological impact does not directly equal the symptoms of dementia. So when we look at a person, when we're in a person's company, we are not concluding that their behavior is an effect of causes in their brain. You see, in the biomedical approach, there's a cause and effect relationship. The cause is in the brain, the effect is in the behavior. That is not the understanding of the person-centered care approach. There is certainly something going on in a person's brain because there's something going on in all of our brains. Nevertheless, a person's behavior or the symptoms of dementia does not have a one-to-one correlation with neurological impact. There is another significant contributing variable. And that is what I have tried to symbolize by this yellow square. That person-centered care says that the behavior of a person with dementia or without in this frame, but in any case, the behavior of a person with dementia is the effect of neurological impact plus something else. And it's the something else that goes in the box that is of the essence of person-centered care, and that is the focus of our presentation today. What's in the box? What has to be taken into consideration for us to make sense of how someone with dementia behaves? If we cannot conclude that behavior is simply the result of brain processes, what else must we bring into the equation to begin to understand how it is that someone behaves? Okay, so here we go. I'm going to try to make what's in the box as clear as possible. for me and for you. This is how I put it in a phrase. What is in the box is this: a person's feeling of belonging and mattering or not. So if I were to translate in this to my equation, I would say that the behavior of someone with dementia is the result of two principal contributions. One, what's going on in their brain, plus whether or not that person is feeling that he or she belongs and matter. And if so, to what extent? That would be the way I would distill it into its, I guess, pithiest formulation. A less sort of concrete description would be this: neurological impact plus a person's psychological and social condition. So what is in the yellow frame there is a person's psyche and a person's relationships with other people. Those variables have to be taken into consideration if we're going to understand the behavior of someone with dementia. According to Tom Kitwood, who coined the phrase person-centered care, or at least applied it to this context, Kitwood claimed that only 30% of a person's behavior can be explained according to the neurological impact, which means, therefore, that 70% of what we're seeing in way of behavior is a result of what that person's relationship is with the people in his or her life. Now, I think that is about as clear as I can put person-centered care, because person-centered care involves being mindful of what's in the box and knowing that oneself is contributing, one's very person is contributing to what's in the box. Is everybody with me? Bill, does that seem pretty clear to you? I'll use you as a signpost. Great. So when you're keeping in the box, in order that someone with dementia feels that he or she belongs and matters, with the understanding that if a person feels that he or she belongs and matters, it will dramatically change their condition. According to Tom Kitwood, it will constitute 70% of their condition. I take that to be good news, because 70% of the quality of life, according to Kitwood, of a person with dementia is in our hands, not their brain. I take that to be good news. Here's another way of saying to myself, and I hope it's meaningful to you, what's in the box. The phrase I use is, my world is in your face, or I could turn it around and say, your world is in my face. The illustration here is a man looking into the mirror, and he's seeing another face looking back. And I have now on multiple occasions raised the idea that it is impossible for us to see ourselves directly. If we look in the mirror, we'll see our nose, we'll see our eyes, we can turn around and catch our shoulder blades, but what we won't see is ourself. Because ourself is not an empirical reality. It is not an entity that can be seen or measured. It is more like a dynamic. It is more like a verb than a noun. So if I can't see myself, but I nevertheless, and I'm assuming this is true for you, I nevertheless feel very, very confident that I am here. I feel like I'm a self, even though I've never seen it. So how is it that I have a sense of myself if I can't see it? And what I'm suggesting to both of us is that I see who I am in the way you look at me. Or another way of saying this, there is no me without you. I simply would not have an understanding of myself if it wasn't any number of people in a person's life who are facing him or her. That all of those faces are what's in the box. That is the pithiest way that I can put person-centered care. And I would say that this is true irrespective of cognitive impairment. That in a sense, we live in a world made up of the reflections offered back to us by the people in our lives. And we in turn contribute to their world, the reflection that we offer back. I think that for those of you who were present last week or who have had a chance to watch through the recording, I think you would agree that having seen Sally on the one hand and Gladys in the beginning of their interaction with Naomi, and those two ladies at the end of their interaction with Naomi, I think you would agree with me that they were in dramatically different conditions of being. That before they met Naomi, their being was not as well as their being was after Naomi's contribution of her presence. And I should stress that those interactions, on each occasion, those interactions was the first time that Naomi met both of those ladies. So if you can imagine someone coming out of the blue into your life, you're feeling one thing because you're imagining the world is one thing. Perhaps you're imagining the world has essentially left you. Your body's still around, but no one exactly really notices you, except perhaps insofar as they have a task that you are a means to completing. In other words, yes, people notice my body, but they're noticing it when they're getting me to lunch. They're noticing it when they're getting me in the shower. They're noticing it when they're assisting me taking medicine. Now, I'm sure that this need not be put in this stark terms for your loved ones or anyone else necessarily. Well, indeed, that's true for people. I should say this. Nevertheless, I think it makes it very clear that there is a difference between me existing as a biological organism and me feeling that I belong and matter in a community. And I would further say that the difference, it's not too much of a stretch to say that the difference is something like the difference between the life and the death of my soul, which is to say that the life and the death of my soul is what that box is going to decide. And I take that to be good news because I can do nothing about brain processes. I am not a neuroscientist and I'm not involved in brain research. However, I can, without any particular academic credentials, be involved today in what's inside another person's box. And I need not know anything about neurons to make valuable, profoundly meaningful, potentially life-changing contributions to what's in another person's box. That's good news to me. What I'd like to share now are 3 skills of presence. These skills, let me see you. These are 3 skills that I hope you can take away with you and keep in your mind as readily retrievable as that box illustration. In other words, when you think of this whole series, I want you to have in your mind a keen understanding that person-centered care has everything to do with what's in the box, and what's in the box has at least 70% or more to do with a person's well-being, and that I am qualified to contribute to what's in the box. I want us all to be mindful of that. And I would like for us all to be mindful of these 3 skills of presence that I'm about to share with you. And here we go. The first skill is letting go. I'll bring this back. The first skill is letting go, and specifically letting go of judgment. Now, you can't see it, but I have a supervisor over my right shoulder. Did I share this with you before? that I have a supervisor over my right shoulder, this is the beginning of the skills of presence. I want to stress that in my experience, the number one impediment to intimacy between people with and without dementia is a person's feeling awkward in the company of people with dementia. That because the interactions don't follow smoothly a social script, because the person with dementia is not keeping up with the normal flow of conversation, I am socially uncomfortable in that space. My hypothesis is that that is the feeling above all else that explains why so many people with dementia are unnecessarily suffering from loneliness. They simply make many people uncomfortable. And I'm further trying to diagnose, where does that discomfort come from? Because it's not obvious to me why anyone would necessarily feel uncomfortable or in the presence of somebody who wasn't seamlessly keeping up with conversational norms. Why is that bothersome to us? And my hypothesis is it's bothersome to us because we learn very early that if we want to be accepted in the community, we better pass for normal. I'm going all the way back to first grade. I'm imagining the kids that couldn't pass for normal. What was their life like? They were lucky if they were only ostracized. Many were bullied, which is to say, no matter what else we were learning academically in first grade, one of the things that we were learning is, how do I present myself to other people so that I pass for normal? And I think this is the basis of what makes us self-conscious around people with dementia, because the interactions are not what we would think of typically in many instances, or some instances, as normal. And as cognitive impairment increases, that degree of awkwardness can increase because we have less basis for knowing what to do if a person is saying a stream of words that may not be in a coherent sentence and may not even be recognizable words, or what they call word salad. We probably don't have some kind of precedence for knowing how a person responds. And you can imagine any other things. Naomi sometimes will use the example of someone just taking off his or her shirt. And I don't want to go too far down in what kind of strange behavior might happen. Let me say that for 5 years, I brought, in the context of Memory Bridge, close to 4,000 young people became bridges to 4,000 people with dementia in 5 years, over a 5-year period of time. And I can tell you, in that 5-year period of time, not a single person with dementia got violent with one of the kids. Not a single person with dementia did something sexually inappropriate. There were many occasions when things didn't pass for normal. I'm stressing this because I don't want to give the image that a person at cognitive impairment is necessarily going to lead to some kind of bizarre behavior. But even the slightest divergence from the script into which we've acclimated ourselves socially can cause a degree of self-consciousness. And I'm further saying, well, where does the self-consciousness come from? And it's because I'm imagining what this interaction looks like to a third party. Even if there's not a third party in the room, this is called the generalized other. This is a kind of amalgamation of all the authority figures in my life. My parents, teachers, pastors, coaches, friends, anybody whose judgment I cared about. Over time, we all do, we essentially create what is called in social psychology a generalized other who follows us in our imagination wherever we go. And anything we do, we're keeping an eye on what the grade is or the reaction is of the generalized other. And that's what I'm calling the supervisor. And I'm saying that for me, I think the self-consciousness comes from being preoccupied with the supervisor's opinion of what my interaction looks like. The supervisor is in charge of policing normal. So when I say let go of judgment, what I really mean to myself is I need to let go of being afraid that I'm not going to pass for normal and thereby be kicked out of the community. If you noticed, one thing that Naomi did not care about clearly was what her interaction with Gladys and Sally looked like to anybody else. You could see with the extent of absorption, the total presence that Naomi had with the other lady meant that she was not any percentage of herself self-monitoring. She just wasn't doing that. And I find that inspiring. So that's the one number, letting go. Letting go of this judgment. And you can transform your interactions with people with dementia, including someone that you're close to, simply by telling yourself for the next 15, 30, 45 minutes, this generalized other is it's not a consequence to me what this opinion is of what's about to happen here. Now, I am not saying that a person crosses boundaries of what's ethical or appropriate, much less legal. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about not being self-conscious because something isn't passing for normal. That alone will liberate. That alone will give you confidence to trust some instincts. In other words, you'll have an inclination that I should do this in this moment, or I can do that. You'll have an inclination, and you won't check yourself and be stiff about it. You'll be free to begin to tune in with and to resonate empathically with the other person. I'm suggesting that what blocks attunement or what impedes flow is self-consciousness. And with putting that self-consciousness in brackets, then all of a sudden I can begin to react in real time. And at first I may not be in sync, but guess what? At least I'm beginning to try to dance. And then over time, I can begin to get in more sync. In other words, I'm learning from the other person what a rhythm, a relationship is like for us. And that is, in other words, the expert is not someone that's coming to a conference near you. The expert is the person you are befriending. That is the person that will teach you what he or she needs from you to feel that he or she belongs and matters. And that would mean that every single person with dementia constitutes a new expert, because every single person with dementia is going to be unique, just like every single person without dementia. I take that to be good news, and I take that to be fun news, because look how I'm growing in each interaction, not just as a companion to a person with dementia, but as a human being. While I'm trying to care for your soul, you're caring for my soul, and we're caring for each other's soul by becoming more human. Okay, the second thing, when I let go of this, just as I said, I can let go all of my attention. If I've got 30% attention on the supervisor's judgment, that's only 70% of me that's here. If I got zero attention with a supervisor, that's 100% of me who's here. And I think we can agree that you have a keen sense when somebody is 70% with you and when somebody's 100% with you. And the difference is a difference. I mean, just to give a silly example, I'm in the process of having a root canal, which means I've had to interact with dentists and endodontists, administrative staff. This is a totally pedestrian example, but it really makes a point. And most of the people, I just had kind of a standard bureaucratic interaction, you know, but there was one particular receptionist who actually took time and took interest in what it was that I was going to need to do to make this work with my insurance. And all of a sudden, the whole thing was different. The whole thing about my teeth, everything was different, because this one person all of a sudden was clearly tuned into me. And I also feel this when I've been on occasions in the hospital. You can tell the nurses that are doing their job and the nurses who are living out care. You can feel it in your bones, and your body responds to it. And it's a wonderful feeling. So I'm letting go of judgment, and I'm letting in all of my attentiveness. Now, I want to stress that I do not have to do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There may be many instances in what I need to do is really, in the most loving way possible, is to assist somebody in doing a biological function. So I'm not saying that 24/7 we're staring at each other's face and we're giving back a reflection of compassion or giving the other the feeling of belonging to matter. I'm not talking 24/7, but imagine if we were only talking about, let's say, for a random point of comparison, what if a person was getting close to zero of that? And that's quite true. For instance, Gladys was getting zero of that, and perhaps for as much as a year. You can only imagine if solitary confinement is actually been ruled too cruel, even for hardened criminals. I mean, the impact on the psyche, a psyche that is completely isolated from other people, within 72 hours will begin events and symptoms of psychosis, and that's a perfectly normal brain. Consider what it must be like for people who have come to believe that until they die, they were going to essentially be kind of like an object to other people. I can only imagine the impact to the psyche. So, but imagine then that person 3 times a day for 6 minutes got absolutely self-giving, compassionate, loving attention with 100. Imagine just 3 times a day for 6 minutes compared to 0 times a day. Can you imagine the difference in that person's life? Imagine the difference in my own life. If I got that kind of attention 3 times a day, that's 18 minutes a day. This is a very doable thing. This is why I find this good news. I don't believe that there is another source of suffering that is more readily eliminable than this. And it will require no medicinal breakthrough or technological breakthrough. This is a movement of consciousness that demonstrates itself in the movement of a body to a body. This is very doable. And I would hypothesize that if we were talking about infants here, if everything was the same, but we were talking about infants, I believe in my heart that within 3 or 4 days, there would be a nationwide movement to get people to those infants. Do you know what I mean? If this was infants, this country would go to work and it would be all stops out, celebrities, everything. To have a companion who was an infant would be the coolest thing that you could do. It would be a total movement. I believe that within a week. It's a little different, apparently, if we are looking at somebody who's not an infant, that might not be able to pass for normal, who may have a little spittle, or who might actually be incontinent, for God's sakes, or who knows what the situation is. Just age alone can be a source of decreasing the way someone is perceived in another person's eye. Anyway, what I'm stressing is this is a doable thing, so it's not 24/7. And I would challenge any community with any community anywhere. Just as you have a charts in someone's medical history, I would like to think that every single resident in your community, you have some kind of, if not chart, at least some kind of indicator of how much attention that person is getting that enables him or her to feel that he or she belongs and matter. If I'm keeping up with blood pressure and I'm keeping up with any number of other things, if I'm interested in a person's well-being, I want to start keeping up with that. Who's visiting this person and what is the quality of the companionship? And can you imagine if, just to be mercantile about it, imagine if your community was committed to that and they were living it out and people came to visit to see whether their loved one was going to live there. Imagine the marketing person being able to explain the difference between this community and perhaps other communities, because here I can tell you, this is what we keep up with. Your mother, we will know to its best degree as is humanly possible to what extent your mother is getting the kind of attention that enables her to feel that she belongs and matters. I would be able to say that, and then I would say, if you'd like to see it, take a walk down the hallway. I bet in terms of sheer dollars, in a short period of time, you'd have a waiting list so long. Okay, that's trying to fire us both up. Letting go of judgment, letting in 100% attention, and as I mentioned before, letting be a new normal. when someone feels that he or she passes for normal, then they have confidence and the courage to start offering themselves. They get into it. For those of you who've seen it, the difference between Gladys before and after Naomi, these are two different people. If someone just said this, somebody just came up out of the grave, it would be pretty close to that. And that's what, I don't know, 30 minutes of attention abbreviated into 5 minutes. That's a remarkable new normal. This was a new behavior. This was a different woman. Okay, and same thing with Sally. Sally, who was apologizing for having tears, to Sally, who was singing a cappella. I watched that in about 10 or 15 minutes. That's remarkable. It was a new normal for Sally. It was a new normal for Gladys. And what I'm stressing is the reason it could become a new normal is that Naomi was willing to go there. Had she not been willing to go there, there would never be a new normal. And by new normal, I simply mean there is a normal in which we both equally pass. Not, I'm passing for normal and you're not. I'm going to find with you, the normal in which we're both equally normal. I'm going to find that with you. And then that's going to liberate you. You're going to all of a sudden be a normal person. Can you imagine if you just, in the back of your mind, you're walking around and there's just something about you that's not normal? Imagine the stigma. A person with dementia. What if we just started doing with other things? A person with massive debt, a person with a criminal record, a person with chronic depression, a person with multiple divorces. What kind of with do we put in there? You see what I mean? If we started putting our withs in there, we'd all be a person with something. It would be abnormal if we weren't a person with something, in my experience. So this is a kind of thing we can let go of, the with thing, as if that disqualified somebody for a certain kind of intimacy and companionship. And that will heal what medicine can't cure. That is my distillation of person-centered care and what I can practically do about it in terms that I hope are semi-unforgettable. I want to close this experience by sharing with you really how I came to understand what it means that my life is in another person's face. Because that's what we're talking about. My life is in your face, your life is in my face. Here's how I came to understand that in my bones. In 1988, I was a student at the University of Texas. I was going to graduate within a year, and I started feeling uncomfortable because I'd always fantasized that when I went to college over that 4-year period, I would somehow be transformed into a different person. I came from a little country town and went off to a big school. And I thought at the end of 4 years at the University of Texas, I'm going to go back to my little town and, you know, people are going to kind of come up to me and ask for life advice, or they're going to be seeking wisdom. And I'm going to be, you know, really too modest to tell them to directly, but I'm going to kind of gently guide them. Whatever I was fantasizing, you know, from Pinocchio the toy to Pinocchio the real boy, or Gandalf the Gray to Gandalf the White. I imagined that college somehow changed my humanity into something exalted. And I was a year away from graduating, and I was absolutely confident that that hadn't happened. Okay, like 100%. So I didn't really want to graduate directly until it happened, because I thought that was the point of college. So what I did, I quit school and moved to Paris, France, not Texas. And my goal was to find myself, because that's what I thought I really needed to do. I really needed to find myself. And for some reason, I was able to come up with a harebrained idea that myself was likely to be found in Paris. I think I had fantasized being a writer, and I had all the expatriate stuff of the 20s with Hemingway and Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, John Dos Passos, Joyce. I had all that stuff in my head. Anyway, I was going to Paris to find myself. I didn't even know exactly how to do it. So I thought, well, you know, I was go to art galleries. I should go to museums. I should sit in coffee shops and have espresso. And I should kind of look angst, you know, like Sartre. Maybe I should try to smoke. Things should probably go bad in my life in Paris for a little bit, because that would help me to find myself. I I started reading a lot. And in the course of my reading, I got into learning about Buddhism in a very superficial way. But what I learned is that in one tradition of Zen, there is something called koans, Koan. And a koan is a saying that doesn't make rational sense that the master gives to the student when the student comes seeking enlightenment. So when the student goes to the master asking for enlightenment, the master gives the student a koan, and it's a saying again that doesn't make rational sense. So let me give you an example. The most famous koan I know of in the West is made famous by J.D. Salinger. What is the sound of one hand clapping? So I would go to the master seeking enlightenment, and the master would say, when you can tell me the sound of one hand clapping, come back. And each person would get a different koan. And the idea was that when your logical, rational mind gave up trying to make sense of something that couldn't be made sense of that way, that was good news, because then other parts of your psyche could start to get a word in edgewise. Dimensions of your identity that weren't reducible to that little pass the test, calculative intelligence would start to participate in meaning making. And the koan was designed to jumpstart that by discombobulating our habits of making meaning in rational, superficially rational ways. Okay, so I said, look, I get it now. I need a koan. I'm not going to find myself until I have a koan. So I got a book of koans, and I randomly just turned the pages and I put down my finger, and I said, the koan closest to my finger is going to be my koan. So I did that, and the koan that I assigned myself by that method was this: show me the face that you wore before your mother and father were born. That made no sense to me. It made such no sense to me that I was tempted to give my koan back and do it again. But you're not allowed to do that. It didn't seem to me that you could, that the guru would give you a koan, you'd look at it and say, no, give me have another koan. I don't think that's how it worked, and I don't even think if you had super wealthy parents that they could call the guru and work out a deal. I just think you get the koan that you get. So I had to get the koan that I got. Every day thereafter, for at least 45 minutes or 60 minutes a day, I would meditate on my koan in my little studio apartment in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. Le Mot-Piquet-Grenelle was the metro stop. Any case, I did not know how to meditate. I grew up in East Texas as a Southern Baptist. We did not meditate. All I knew about meditating was two things. One, you should be quiet. And two, your legs should be uncomfortable. This is what I knew about meditating, and I thought I could do it. So every day I would, at some point, I would go roll down the little metal shutters that went on this window. I would roll it down. They didn't have curtains. They had this little thing like it bringing the garage down. So I'd roll this thing down till there was about 2 inches left. And then in that 2-inch space, whatever sunlight there was would seep through that crevice and sort of, bathe my ratty carpet in sunlight. And I would sit in that circle of light and I would meditate on my koan. And I did this every day. This was, I mean, if you can imagine anything more pitiful, this is what I was doing in Paris. And nothing happened. Nothing. For 11 months and 9 days. Nothing.
Wow.
But on the 10th day of the 11th month, I'm here to tell you that at least for me, this stuff works. Because on the 10th day, I had complete and total clarity of the answer to my koan. I knew what the answer was. It was just, I'm not saying that, Shirley MacLaine said it out loud in my studio, but I'm saying that I knew in my heart and in my mind that this was the answer for me. And the answer was this: the face you wore before your mother and father were born was the face of your grandparents. It just came to me out of the blue. I didn't figure it out. It found me and planted a flag right between my eyes. And so I said, if that's the case, if I'm going to find myself, I'm not going to be in Paris. I need to get back to East Texas, and I need to spend time with my grandparents, and I need to take an interest in their past. I need to be listening to their stories of their life while they're living, so that I can get a glimpse through their stories of the face that I wore before my mother and father were born, because in their stories, my story grew. And that's what I did. 10 days later, I was on a big plane. I landed at George Bush International. My stepdad and mother picked me up. On the way back home to Hampshire, Texas, I asked my stepdad to pull into a Walmart, and I bought every 90-minute cassette that Walmart had, 45 minutes on each side. Back when there were cassettes, I had a case of it. And what I then did is I moved into each of my two grandparents' house, one after the other, and just lived there for a while and listened to their stories and tried the best I could to capture those stories on these cassettes. One of my grandparents, my grandfather on my mother's side, he really relished sharing his life stories. He was a natural storyteller, and he just took great delight in this. And we spent hours. He was in his orange recliner, and I was in the couch catty corner to him. And between us, there was a big red Folgers coffee can that was filled with paper towel. And that paper towel was pockmarked with chewing tobacco spit, because that was his spittoon, a big red Folgers can. And in addition to that was my little brother's jam box, which every once in a while would get a little of the chewing tobacco spit, by the way. It was the jam box, and in that jam box were those cassettes. And I would listen to my grandfather, and he would just, one story would lead to the other. At 45-minute point, he got good at this. I'd raise up my finger to flip the cassette, you know. So if he was telling me, and boy, we were going to cross a bridge. Well, if I was going to hold up my finger, and he said, oh, and boy, we were going to, I'd do like this. He'd pause. I'd flip the cassette. He would spit. Then I would hit record again and look at him, and he'd go, cross the bridge. I mean, he just got good at it. We had it down. Anyway, hours of this. I got them on cassettes. I got them. And I took those cassettes, and I took those stories on those cassettes, and I put them together in a novella. And I took that novella to Kinko's, and Kinko's published it for me. It was an incredible publication. I called it Over and Under and Back from Whence You Came. I put it in the best material they had. It was a fake green leather. And I brought it to my grandfather. Over and Under and Back from Whence You Came was taken from a Yoruba proverb. No, excuse me. The epigraph was taken from a Yoruba proverb, which was, a wise stream never forgets its source. The title itself was taken from a little ditty that my grandfather taught me, so that you could remember how to tie a tie. When he learned that I couldn't tie a tie, it almost knocked him over. I was 22 years old. How was I ever going to have a family and raise children if I couldn't tie a tie? So we marched me into the bathroom, and he said, now, boy, I'm going to teach you this ditty, and you're going to never forget how to tie a tie. You go over and under and back from whence you came. You do that 2 times and pull that through, and that's how you tie a tie. So that's where I got the name for that. Any case, and I gave this collection of stories to my grandfather, and he loved it. He just loved it. He loved to read them. He loved to share his stories with other people. It was a great thing. I'm glad I did that, because about 5 years later, my grandfather began to evince conspicuous symptoms of memory loss. I remember the first thing that I knew he'd forgotten in an unusual way. He was going to tell me that he had watched on TV the night before a hockey game, but he couldn't recall the word hockey. So he said, now, boy, there was a game, and there was nothing there. Well, you know, boy, it's got ice and big socks and a stick. Hockey? Yeah, boy, hockey. I watch hockey. Well, that wasn't a huge deal. You can live a very generative life in Mont Belvieu, Texas, without ever one time saying the word hockey. Okay, you could be elected mayor on 4 successive terms and never one time mentioned hockey. So that wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal when my grandfather ceased to be able to recall the names of close friends. I remember when he was trying to remember the name of Charlie Waldrop. I knew his name because I knew the story already. But when he was telling it to me on this occasion, this was a story of how during the Depression, when he didn't have a job and didn't know where he was going to get one, how Charlie Waldrop helped him get on with the Sun Oil Company as a roustabout. And he loved telling that story because he appreciated how much his friend had gone out of his way to enable him and his family to survive. But on this occasion, when he got to the name of the man who had helped him in this way, he drew a complete blank. And I could see that when it was clear in his mind that he was not going to recall it, that there was a kind of pain that he felt, because he was not experiencing it as memory loss. That's how I was making sense of it from the outside in. But from the inside out, he was experiencing that as a betrayal of friendship. Here was a man who had done so much for him, and he didn't have the human decency to remember his name. What kind of friend is that? That was not Alzheimer's disease. That was the dis-ease of Alzheimer's. You couldn't explain this with neurons alone, because it was a meaning that my grandfather was making. Another man may not have cared. My grandfather cared. There was a day when my grandfather was no longer able to leave the house alone and reliably make it back. And my grandmother wasn't in the best of health, so if he left and we couldn't get him back and they lived alone, that was going to be a danger to both of them. We didn't know what to do, so we got together as a family and we decided, for will or woe, that we were going to change the locks on all the doors, reverse them, and everyone would have a key but my grandfather. Now, if you ever visit my grandfather and you decided you needed to go, he was going to say, "Oh, boy, oh, girl, what's your hurry?" You could have been there 4 hours. You could have been there 4 months. He would have still said, "What's your hurry?" And if you convinced him that you really needed to go somewhere, what he was going to do is he was going to help you gather your belongings, and he was going to walk with you to your car. He was going to put your belongings in the trunk of your car, and when you were ensconced behind the driver's wheel, he was going to do like this, and you were going to roll down the window, and he was going to say, "Now, boy, you'll be home in 52 minutes. He was a track coach, so the clock meant something to him, and that was his way of showing you how appreciative he was that you had come to visit him. He wanted you to know that he was going to be thinking about you as you were going home. He was going to be with you, traveling with you, and he was going to know when you made it home, because he knew how much time it was going to take. And that's the way he expressed his gratitude. But now on this particular occasion, when I was on my way out of the house and my grandfather was escorting me, it dawned on me before I got to the door that my grandfather wasn't going to be coming out that door with me this time, because I was leaving and he would have been by himself, and we had a contingency in place. So in the last possible moment, I took from him what he was carrying for me, and I beat a hasty path out the door and shut it behind me and locked it before he could get to it. Now, I'll never forget this. This was a glass door, and it was divided with a wood partition shaped like rectangles. My grandfather and I are the same height. So there was a moment when we were each on different sides of the same glass pane, looking into each other's eyes. And I could see on his face something like the expression of, "Son, why am I not allowed to come with you?" Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a position where a grandparent of yours, at least in your mind, was feeling like you were punishing him or her. In this case, punishing him or her to their own house. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but it's a terrible experience. I did not have a good answer, really. That is the dis-ease of Alzheimer's. You can't explain that with neurons. This is something else. Then there came a time when my grandfather was not able to read his own story, the story I'd give him over and under, back from which you came. He could not read it and understand it. There was a time when he couldn't read it, but he knew it was his story, and he would have my grandmother read it to him. I remember watching that and thinking to myself, now, where is my grandfather's self now? You see, I'd gone to Paris to find myself, and here was a very interesting situation. Was my grandfather's self in his brain? Was it in those stories, or was it in my grandmother's voice that he was hearing? Where was his self now? It occurred to me that the self was a very interesting non-thing. Then there came a day when my grandfather was no longer able to feed himself, to shower himself, or to toilet himself. And then there came a day when my grandfather was no longer with us in body, or so it seemed clearly to me. The family from all parts of Texas, because we lived in different places of the state, family members from all over Texas returned to my grandparents' house for my grandfather's funeral. And on the first night, my mother came to me and she said, son, why don't you get those tapes out that you made years ago? And why don't you play them? Because I think it will bring solace to the family to hear Granddaddy telling his stories. I thought that was a great idea. I found a player that could play a cassette, and I got those tapes out. I knew his favorite story. I put it in the little music box and I hit play and turned the volume up. I put it in the center of the living room. And I watched as all across the house, the buzz of conversation subsided, and people began, as if by instinct, to find their way into the living room from wherever they were in the house, some alone, some in the groups in which they were visiting, but all almost really as if a spontaneous, deep understanding was guiding them, found their way into the living room, and they formed a circle. My family circled around that music box from which my grandfather's voice was emanating. And it was completely silent. And I said to myself, where is your grandfather's self now? It dawned on me in that moment that my grandfather had pulled a trick on Alzheimer's disease. Because when Alzheimer's disease came to take away his self, it was too late. He had already given his self away into ourselves. He had taken his time, he had taken his attention, and he had taken his love, and he had just communicated himself into our bodies, our remembered body. You see, we typically live dismembered across the state, but on this occasion, we were remembered, R-E-membered. We often think of remembering as an act of intellectual recollection, and I'm suggesting that there is something more interesting about remembering in that. And this remembering involves bringing bodies that are dismembered back into community. That is remembering. Well, I'll share with you my grandfather's favorite story, and then we'll call it a day. My grandfather was 10 years old, and he was demonstrating to his sister how he could strike a match with one hand. His daddy could do that, and he wanted to be just like his daddy. They were sitting on a bale of hay at his granddaddy's farm, and that bale of hay was right next to his granddaddy's barn. And match after match, he wasn't having any luck striking it, so he said to his sister, let's go on in the house. I'll show you how this works tomorrow. And they went into the house. Now, unbeknownst to him, he was a little bit better at that trick than he realized, because one of those match heads struck on his nail, and when it went over his shoulder, it fell into that hay, but he and his sister were already in the house when that hay erupted. It just erupted. It was just and the hay was like kindling wood to the barn, and the barn caught on fire and burned down, and everything in the barn burned down. And what was in the barn was that year's cotton crop. His daddy was a cotton farmer, and not only was it all the cotton of that year, it was the seed crop put aside for next year. Burned it down to the ground. And my granddaddy said to me, "Now, don't you know, boy, that was the worst day of my life?" My granddaddy took me in to raise, and he did. When my grandfather's parents divorced, his grandparents adopted him. That man took me in to raise, and out of carelessness, I had ruined my old granddaddy financially. Don't you know, it was the worst day of my life. And my granddaddy said he was sitting on a stump waiting for his granddaddy to come home. His granddaddy happened to be the local judge. T.E. Rowe was his name. The T stood for T, the E stood for E. He was the judge that people picked. There was an official judge at the county seat, but in those days, it took so much time to get to the county seat that if there were local disputes, the people had decided that they could work it out themselves on many occasions, and they would pick the person who they felt had the most integrity and sound judgment among them to serve as a judge. And my granddaddy's granddaddy was the selected judge of his little community. Well, don't you know, it was judgment day indeed for that little boy who was sitting on the stump when his granddaddy came home. His granddaddy crossed the yard, and my granddaddy said 3 times I tried to explain to him what had happened. And 3 times I burst out in tears, boy. I couldn't get it out. There wasn't a lot really that needed to be explained, he said, because you could see the evidence in the ember and ashes of what was no longer left of that barn. On the 3rd occasion, he said to me, my granddaddy moved beside me on the stump. He put his arm around my shoulder. He drew me to his side, and he said to me, boy, your old granddaddy has made a mistake or two in his life. The sun will come up tomorrow. When my granddaddy told me that, he was sitting in his orange recliner, looking at me face to face. And when he said that, I saw the face that my mother and father wore, or that I wore before my mother and father were born. And I believe that was the face that my granddaddy saw on his granddaddy's face when he looked at him and said, boy, your old granddaddy has made a mistake or two in his life. My granddaddy said to me, boy, I'm 77 years old, and I hope before I die, I learn to love like my old granddaddy loved me. I'll never forget that. And I have wondered to this day where that old man, and by old man, I mean my granddaddy's granddaddy, where did that old man come by the wisdom and the grace in that moment of his absolute financial ruin? Where did he in that moment come by that kind of grace to remember that in addition to raising cotton, he was raising a child, and the comparison between the two left nothing to be compared? Because where there had been a barn, that old man built a bridge. He built a bridge right from his heart to that little boy's heart who was on the other side of a chasm. Because in that moment, my granddaddy did not feel that he deserved to be a member of that family. That he had done something so terrible that he was no longer qualified to be a member of that family. And when his granddaddy told him that he too had made a mistake and the sun would come up tomorrow, what happened was a dismembered little boy was remembered. And had his granddaddy not done that, a half of that little boy would have forever lived on the other side of that chasm. He would have kept growing chronologically, but a part of him, and perhaps the bigger part of him, would have always been on that other side, a chasm of shame. And he would have grown up half a man, and it would have been half a man that raised my mother. So his granddaddy remembered him by showing him in his face that there was nothing that he could ever do to be disqualified from that family. Nothing. And then that little boy just came home, a whole boy, to grow up to be a whole man. I'm sharing this story with both of us because there's thousands of people within a very, very short distance from wherever you are who are feeling like, because of some incapacity that has overcome them, that they are no longer qualified to be full members of the community. At best, they can be sort of members, but they don't completely belong and matter because they're a person with something. And while there's nothing that maybe you or I can do right now to end the death of brain cells, there's something that every one of us can do to end the dis-ease, that is the loneliness of feeling that in every face that one looks, there's going to be something less than a beautiful face looking back. And we can do that by moving our bodies to that body and showing them with our presence that there is nothing that can ever happen to their brain that will disqualify them from being 100% members of this community. That will be person-centered care. And we don't have to be experts in a technique. We can just do the best that we can with the love that has been given to us. I want to thank you for being here in this series. I want to thank Bill and Sunnyview and Front Porch more generally for making this opportunity. I want to thank Richard and Jean Eckert for financially making this possible. I hope that you'll walk away from this empowered to be a bridge to a person who is in need of being remembered. And I hope that you feel confident that you're qualified to do that. Everybody, some of you I'll hope to see in person in October. Others I hope to see down the line. In some context, I would like to think that we could grow what we're growing in Sunnyview and other places within the Front Porch constellation of communities as well. And I appreciate everything that you've offered me in way of a kind face to encourage me in my effort to share with you what I've learned in being with people with dementia. Everybody, thank you very much, and God bless you. Bill, thank you.
Michael, thank you. This has been a very special 4 weeks for us. Since the beginning, I knew how special you were in this field, and everyone on this call or on this Zoom call has someone affected by dementia, and it's the field we work in. So it makes it even more special knowing that our frontline staff has this information and able to bring those people back and feel part of a family. So it's been special, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And we hope a lot of them will join us in October to do this in person. And very grateful for you, very grateful for everyone that took part of this. And we need to spread this message of love. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon, and hope you send me an email that you're very interested in learning more from Michael Verde, because he is very special. And Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. See you later.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. God bless you.
Bless you. Take care.